Hello, I'm Karen, and this is the reading of Chapter 9 of Greenlight Medical Anatomy of Kindness by Lunager on AO3. As a side note, it is the 4th of July, and I am American, so you might be able to hear fireworks going off. Chapter 9. Out. The beeping is steady, predictable, annoyingly comforting in this situation. Shota surfaced slowly, keeping the worry and panic at bay, intent on not alerting the doctor with his quick change of heartbeat pace, just in case they had that monitored and would be able to put him to sleep again. It felt like dragging himself up through cold water and remaining still just before breaking the surface, like not being able to breathe fully and each of his ribs aching with missed air. He didn't open his eyes, didn't move, he catalogued instead. The bed beneath him, rush sheets beneath his skin, even if it seemed much more pleasant the first time he woke up. An IV that wasn't there before in his arm. Great, who knows what he was given now. That mask, no, not on his face again. Good. He won't be able to be put under again. He inhales carefully, keeping his breathing regular and deep, like someone who was still quite unconscious to the world. Disinfectant, cheap soap. Although the second one was new, maybe he was moved? But alas, still the mimicry of a hospital, in care of a possible vigilante. Fine. He keeps his breathing even, in for 5, out for 4, calm and steady as if he was fast asleep. He waits to recognize the pressure or the weight. Metal bites at his skin, obviously distinctly different than the bed sheets do, and handcuffs leave a distinct pressure along the ulna bone when you're lying flat, even well cushioned. He braced for his brain to catch up, to recognize the cold ring around his wrists, the quiet of restraint. Nothing. No bite of steel, just clammy skin. His hands were free? That was good. So the doctor decided he wouldn't panic again when waking up, which meant he was calmer and felt more in control of the situation now that he had some actual range of movement. He shifted his fingers experimentally to form a loose fist. The IV line tugs, tape pulls against his skin. Still no cuffs. And then suspicion prickled along his spine. If he's not restrained, maybe he's more injured than he thought, and the doctor realized now he won't wake up fueled with adrenaline. He won't be able to fight or even run away once they realize who he is. He gives up trying to feel and listens instead. Footsteps somewhere distant, the faint roll of a cart, muffled voices, as if it was behind a thick door. Almost like a real hospital. How large was the clinic? They did have staff who he didn't hear 3 times when he had been awake. And then, shifting next to him, warmth, a hand wrapping around his. He does his best not to flinch, mind already racing with the ways that this was crossing his boundaries. But then it was firm, callous in places he knows by memory and still somehow soft. A thumb brushed slowly over his knuckles in circles. Shota's next breath caught somewhere in his throat. You're gonna hate the headache when you wake up, his husband's low voice murmurs, roughened with exhaustion, tone full of force, lightness stretched thin over fear. I swear you get yourself in a mess like this again, I don't know, something definitely. Recognition slammed into him harder than any injury could. Shota's eyes instantly snapped open. The ceiling blurred for a second, and he cringed at the sudden flood of light, for his focus sharpened. Fluorescent lights, pale walls. Turning his head, he had to stifle tears. There he was. Disheveled hair in a loose bun, red-rimmed eyes, a 3-day-old stubble framing his normally so clean mustache. Still wearing the clothes that he had seen him leave for the radio with. Still holding his hand like letting go would undo something vital. Hizashi. Shota stares at him, searching instinctively for signs. Illusion, quirk interference, trickery. None that he could see, and the hand in his remained solid until he squeezed it. Just his husband. Sunlight from the giant window behind him illuminated Hisashi, framing him in a golden halo, and Shota's tears threatened to spill over. 24 hours ago, or longer, he had been convinced he would never see him again. Now the blonde's eyes were once again roaming over his face, worryingly, lips tugging upward in a shaky smirk. I assume I look like shit, Shota rasped, because that was easier than emitting the wave of relief threatening to crack his composure in half. The thumb stills, his husband's expression collapses, tight worry unraveling into almost a disbelieving smile. About as good as you think you look after nearly dying, he says softly, squeezing his hand. I'm glad you're still here. Shota exhaled slowly. No cuffs, no restraints, just warmth. Where was here, anyway? He tightened his fingers weakly around his husband's hand, grounding himself in the solid, undeniable reality of him before looking around. The big window behind his husband was, well, big. Obviously larger than the inside of the room he first woke up in. The ceiling stretched high, as if it was standard for actual hospitals, and instead of the yellow line stretching across all walls, the one across from him was painted entirely in the sunshine color, although it was a different shade in the one he remembered the stripe being. So the room wasn't renovated in the same time as the one of the Vigilante clinic. Could it be he was out? He moved his head to the other side to look at the door to confirm and flinched. At his other side sat Tsukauchi. How the hell did he not realize there was another presence next to him? Was the situational awareness really that bad when he was waking up? Tsukauchi grinned at him, and while less pronounced in his face, the worry was still evident. You really don't do things halfway, do you? Didn't just get robbed, but you had to nearly die also. His grin was reduced to a smile, and very briefly a dark look went over his eyes, probably recalling the hours when Eraserhead was presumed dead, which is most definitely what happened if Hisashi looked like he did. With near-death experiences, they could cope. Sure, not very well when it concerned the other, but they could also hold themselves together and still function. Hisashi would only let himself go like that and ignore his appearance if something grave had happened. But he would get their side of the story later. For now, he was just happy to be reunited with his husband. It's an hour later that they sit inside the hospital room. An actual hospital room, thank God. Intense silence. Shota told them each and every detail he remembered, from waking up in the alley, to the breathing device that incapacitated him, to that odd doctor. They settled on the doctor being a man with his stature, to handing the doctor the phone he had been allowed to call with and giving his permission for some things he only remembered vaguely. Hisashi filled in where the clinic had been, a cafe of all places, and what the way around the apparently makeshift clinic was. He also added that the doctor had told him he would be in contact over Hisashi's number, since so far his former patient was missing his phone, while looking at Shota quizzically. Shota did tell them of his plan right after. He wasn't an idiot after all. At first he wanted to keep his idea out of the story, just to hear what the other two would do, but then realized his actions and the words of the doctor would not make sense. So he told them of the plans to become a vigilante, albeit temporary. Tsukauchi had immediately sighed and started tapping the end of his pen against the open notepad, which he had used to protocol down Shota's retelling of the experience. Hisashi had leaned back against the uncomfortable visitor's chair and shut his eyes tightly, face pulling into a frown, as if even this prospect was causing him physical pain. Shota sat between them, keeping busy by flexing his hand for short moments before releasing the tension again and wondering how the doctor's quirk worked, that it healed him so fast, and how he noticed with a very small subconscious part of him kept getting better with every moment. When he first woke up, the only thing keeping him from hurting was the adrenaline, but by the time he finished his call with Sashi, He was swinging in and out of consciousness from the pain raking his abdomen and shoulder. Takachi sighed again, louder this time, and followed it up with a sentence. "We should keep the HPSC out of this." Zashi's eyes snapped open and went wide as saucers. He leaned forward over the hospital bed. "You're not actually considering sending him on the mission, right?" But Sakachi only avoided his gaze and turned his notebook sideways. "You're kidding me, right? He nearly died. He needs rest," his husband said in the driest tone he could manage, while somehow keeping disbelief in it. The other across the bed from him simply sighed again before replying, "We both know he will return to work anyway, as soon as he's able to." Hisashi glances down at his husband for a moment before groaning, knowing that the detective was absolutely right. An amused Shota looked between them. Tsukachi was still staring at the empty page in his notebook when he clicked his pen and mumbled, "The HPSC will just see it as a simple breaking and entering mission to retrieve communication of the Vigilantes and take them all down." He closed his eyes and scratched at his chin with the pen. "Well, we could take this as a chance to figure out how they operate, if any of them are trouble and can be saved before the law, when we ultimately close the case and reveal what we were working with." Shota nodded along, knowing that both of their opinions on vigilantes were pretty much neutral. If they were helping other people the heroes were missing, they could help. It only got difficult when they commit the same crimes that they chastise others for, or get caught. Hisashi narrowed his eyes next to him at this, so far, hypothetical scenario. Tsukachi opens his eyes and sets his pen to paper again, seemingly having to come up with a conclusion. "We will have to get a permit for that with as few details as possible somehow," he said while writing it down as a bullet point at the top of the page. Hisashi only exhaled loudly and leaned back in his chair again. Shota looked at him with a raised eyebrow, which to the blonde scoffed and turned to look at the table at the far wall. Shota, satisfied, turned back to Tsukachi, knowing that his husband understood exactly why he had to do this, and that he would have done the same if he was in a position to do so. Tsukachi started scribbling on his notepad again, his words accompanying every phrase written down. "I suggest that if you were to take up the mantle of a vigilante, you shouldn't be seen at the station." He glances up briefly, gaze flicking between Shota and Hisashi, before crossing out a word and correcting himself. "The both of you, actually. The doctor has now seen both of your civilian identities, so if there is even the slightest chance that he spreads around what you both actually look like, it could be a risk for the mission for you to show up at the station. If any of those network vigilantes are around and recognize Yamada, or God forbid, you, Aizawa, they will ring the alarm that you're selling them out or actually work there." Shota nods along while his husband crosses his ankles and arms like he always does on official mission briefs. So he was already on board here. Good. "With us not giving many details on the mission, we won't get much funding for this, if at all. The only reason I think this will be approved is because you were both respected at the station, and they trust us not to pull something stupid. Well, we won't get access to different housing for both of you for the duration of this mission. Would you be fine if the network potentially knowing where you live?" Shota immediately said yes, having come to the same conclusion as the detective did back at the Greenlight clinic, and has made peace with that. Hisashi took a second, but echoed the same answer back. They both wanted to move onto UA grounds anyway sometime during the upcoming school year. Tsukachi ticked one of the bullet points off with the green side of his pen. "It would be a bad idea to write the debriefs over email or phone. We don't know why the doctor trusted you instantly to let you into the clinic, so if we could only assume they have ways to run background checks. Assuming that, we could also consider that they could have a quirk or a hacker on hand to intercept your messages to check them for info. It would probably be the safest to just write down everything you find in a notebook at home, and have Yamada drop it off every 3 weeks during the afternoon. Vigilantes are usually active during the night, and even if you are seen, it could be explained by something else, like you having to make a statement because of an accident at your accounting job. Zashi scrunched his nose briefly at suddenly being very much involved in this mission, but let it go quickly and nodded. Further, we should arrange... A knock at the door interrupts him. Shota tries to turn his head towards the door, but the movement pulls at his shoulder injury, and he suppresses a hiss at the burning sensation. Not as healed as he thought he was. But even without looking, he can recognize the familiar clack of a cane and the thudding of Recovery Girl. Tsukachi quickly shoves his notepad into his coat and moves to the side to allow her to stand next to him. The older woman only glances at where the notes disappeared in suspicion before narrowing her gaze on Shota. Shota leveled her with his own stare, which was completely ineffective. Instead of not berating him, she raised her cane to knock into his leg and started her scolding right away. He mostly tuned her out since he already expected her to be like this and could predict some of her points. How dare he get injured after she specifically told him not to send anyone to her, including himself, this month anymore. How dare he be so gravely injured that he can't be sent to the UA infirmary, which is closer to her home instead of a hospital, and why she is the only doctor he will allow near himself. She mumbles on, and secretly Shota is glad that she's too busy chiding him, or she would have noticed the way he had started blinking just a bit faster to get rid of any wayward tears running into his eyes. Being sentimental about it, his thoughts raced to remind him that he could have lost his chance to ever thank any of the people in this room for working with him, helping and caring for him. He felt the unnecessary need to let Sujinji know how much she is appreciated. And for some unknown reason, he also went through with it. He couldn't stop the words from tumbling clumsily from his mouth as she said, "Thank you for being here, Recovery Girl." He couldn't also help the corner of his mouth tugging up in a half smile. The youthful heroine cut herself off immediately and stared at him as if he had grown a second head. "Never mind, I see how severe the situation is. He definitely has a major concussion and has suffered a lot from blood loss." Tsukachi shut his eyes tightly to avoid laughing. Shota could tell that just next to him, Hizashi was trying the very same by pursing his lips and staring up at the ceiling. He seemingly failed because he said, "Actually, only a minor concussion." It was accompanied by an airy giggle. Recovery Girl pursed her lips and stepped forward closer to the bed. Shota did his best to lean down and meet her halfway for her to leave a kiss on his forehead. Her lips met his skin and nothing happened. At least not to his knowledge. The usual wave of dizziness didn't come. Sleep didn't wash over him like it always did. Only after moments when Recovery Girl already moved away, his body started to grow heavy and limp, although his mind was still quite alert. Recovery Girl frowned, but nonetheless walked around the bed, moved his patient gown to the side, and removed the bandages around his shoulder carefully. The bandages revealed closed skin and 5 small scars where the bullets apparently entered. Shusenji huffed and unwrapped the wound around his abdomen, also clear. The skin just looked a bit more pink and raw compared to the one on his shoulder, but it didn't even appear to scar. She took out a little flashlight and shone it in his eyes, one after another, before rattling off the checklist of symptoms for a concussion, which he all declined having. Recovery Girl stared at him for a moment strangely, before huffing and turning around to leave, saying a quick goodbye and grumbling about how she has to get back to her morning tea. The door closes with a swish, the click of a lock and the door frame audible loudly in the quiet room. Hizashi clears his throat after a few seconds, which redirects the other occupants of the room's attention to him. He is tapping his fingers in a rhythm against the armrest and switching between looking at the doorway, looking at the shut entryway, and the IV bag hanging above Shota's head. "We should probably get her involved. Every time you get healed by the doctor, we could bring her to you too, so she can check you over again and make sure nothing is missed. Besides, the doctor injected you with one of these green vials that were in the closet before we left. So she should probably run some toxin screens and blood tests on you the next time you're injected with it, so we can find out what it is. Sakauchi and Shota nod in agreement. Then a thought shoots in his head, and he groans. Netsu will definitely be involved in this. Not because they were all eager to rope an end to it, but because the rat always got his way, and there was no way he wouldn't find out about this sooner or later. Besides, if they were to try and clear some of the Vigilantes' names, a powerful figure like him could be useful among them. The next 2 weeks were agony for Shota, not because he injured himself or anything, but because his mission started right away the moment he left the hospital. Now, you might ask yourself, why the hell would he be bothered about working when he does that willingly anyway? His work consisted of him pretending to be injured and staying at home. That was it. Contrary to him being healed now, the doctor still believed that he was on bed rest, so they couldn't risk him being seen at all. Only during the last 2 days was he allowed to go on grocery store trips and attend staff meetings at UA. The second, of course, only while wearing a medical mask and having pulled up his hair into a high ponytail to be less recognizable. Otherwise, he spent his days going over lesson plans, cooking restlessly, catching up on a year's worth of sleep, and of course, creating a vigilante costume with his husband. He felt like a high schooler all over again, just that this time he didn't have a support company bringing his design to life, but they had to use the same resources a civilian might have. It was supposed to be simplistic and dark, just thrown together with some things they could find at a mall or some stores, but that didn't stop Hisashi from sketching and coloring as if it was some professional designer piece. God, he even hung it up on the fridge the next day, like he once said his foster parents did with his final costume design the first year at UA. Sure, it was nice to finally get some free time, but at the same time he had no idea if his patrol route was being covered well enough, and the lives and fates of people he couldn't save in the time he was sitting around the apartment hung heavy in his consciousness. Shota couldn't wait for the day of the checkup, so the mission could actually start. It felt weird heading to the place he nearly lost his life at. Sure, he ultimately got saved by a stranger, but it didn't shake the odd feeling building at the back of his throat when seeing the same dumpster he woke up behind, or the smudge the size of a handprint that was just a shade darker than the brown of the brick facade on the wall where he had tried to catch himself when standing. Hisashi, of course, noticed his unease and stood between him and the rest of the alleyway. His husband gave him an encouraging smile and pulled out their masks. The doctor had instructed them to appear in the clothes they wouldn't mind other vigilantes recognizing if one dropped in injured, and had to be masked since that was only standard for the clinic. Apparently, even he only saw his patient's face and had a suspicion that they were injured around the head. Hisashi chose to wear a full navy outfit and light blue medical mask, since he wouldn't even wear something of one color again, as he said. Shota came in his new vigilante disguise. His usual hero jumpsuit was currently being mended after Hisashi had been called to pick it up one night, the doctor having forgotten to give it back while Shota was being picked up. So there he was, in a new makeshift jumpsuit not too dissimilar to the one he wore as a hero. Really, it was just a black jacket connected to dark gray combat pants with a black zipper, but it looked and felt enough like his real jumpsuit in the dark for him to be able to be somewhat comfortable. Beneath it, he was also wearing something akin to a breastplate that Hisashi had found at some store and carried home victoriously. A new and heavier tool belt hung around his hips, carrying all sorts of helpful things that were simpler than the devices he carried in his hero tool belt. But the amount of them was larger to make up for his lack of quirk in this mission. The thing he missed most, though, was his capture weapon. They couldn't risk him being recognized, even if the chances were low for that with him being an underground hero. The risk was still very real. The space around his neck felt very bare, and even the turtleneck he was wearing beneath his jumpsuit could not make up for that. Since he still needed a long-range weapon, a lasso of some sort was replacing his captured weapon. It was weaker and very odd to use after being used to his scarf for years. It didn't harden when wrapped around an object, and he had to swing it around for it to gain momentum, but he could handle that. Better than getting used to an entirely new long-range weapon, or having none at all. In addition was a black cloth mask, made out of some stretchy fabric. His clasp went around his ears, neck, and head in order to not fall off easily. He didn't dislike it. It was just new. It felt like a new skin for him to hide under, which was precisely what it was meant to be. Shota tugged his mask into place and gave a thumbs up. His husband looked above them, staring at the green light bulb for a moment before decisively knocking against the dark door. It swung open not even a second later, Hisashi's hand still raised in front of it. The shorter doctor greeted them both. "Blank, emergency contact, welcome back." He stepped to the side and held open the door for them. Shota squared his shoulders and took a deep breath in. The new mission officially began. Next to him, Hisashi stepped in confidently and shook the outstretched bare hand of the doctor with his gloved one. Then the doctor turned towards him. "Hello, Blink. I'm glad to see you're all better." Shota suppressed a shudder as seeing the doctor's eyes basically sparkle in the dimmed light of the cafe back room. The doctor led him towards a chair standing in front of the plastic-covered metal table, and Shota felt as if he had just begun to walk towards a very daunting evening. To his surprise, the checkup runs smoothly. Shota can almost pretend that it's recovery girl examining him with the efficiency that the doctor moves with. The thing preventing him from doing that is the awareness that he is here on a mission, and that he is sitting on a sturdy chair instead of his usual hospital cot. His shoulder is quickly checked and scanned with some sort of a device. After it gives a satisfactory beep, the doctor moves on. His abdomen is examined just as quickly. A little prodding here, a press there. When Shota doesn't make any sounds of protest, the doctor takes out the scanning device again and holds it up to his side. It beeps again. The doctor doesn't bother putting it away this time, but instead holds it up to his head. It beeps again. All in all, it was over quicker than Hisashi and him anticipated. In the span of 3 minutes, the doctor had cleared him as healed. Now he was just holding out a vibrant green smartwatch to him. Shota accepted it and waited for the doctor to start explaining. And explain he did. "This will be your main communication device with the network. You will receive your schedule over the messaging app installed here and can mirror it to a bigger screen to see it better." Shota clicked on the messaging app as a test and found it empty, save for one number, saved as organization. The doctor chuckled above him. "Once you are home, connect it to your phone and type it in when you are free to work and send it over. Read by me and my coordinator. You will receive your schedule as fast as possible after that. Any questions so far?" Shota nodded, exiting the message app. He debated whether he could ask his most important question concerning this device, but after fighting himself for a moment, he reasoned that any vigilante would want to know this. "Is there a tracker on this thing?" The doctor's eyes crinkled like he was smiling behind the mask. "Very smart question," he praised, and suddenly Shota felt like a toddler being praised for the mediocre drawing. "The watch is indeed equipped with the tracker, but it is inactive unless you wish to turn it on. You can activate it either the app with the red dot during group missions." Group missions? Shota thought that he would be connected to other vigilantes through his, not that he would be joining something akin to hero missions. The doctor continued on, not noticing his hang-up. Or with this panic button on the side of your watch. It's the only button there, so it shouldn't be hard to find. If you press it accidentally, you have a 3-minute window to open the app right here. The doctor pointed to a red exclamation point icon on the small screen, and your signal will be canceled. If you are in actual trouble, press the button twice, and the nearest vigilante will come over and help. Press it once, and that will mean you are injured and can't get to the clinic yourself. A vigilante will come and give you first aid and either carry you to the clinic, or you can come by car, which will also arrive. You send out a signal. A car? How much funding did this network place have to get their own, basically, ambulances? Great. Whether you are scheduled for patrol, new contacts will appear on your messaging app. Each were the other vigilantes in your vicinity, who you can message for backup. The last app, with the blue call symbol, will be explained to you by your first patrol partner. Any other questions right now? Shota ranked his brain for something he might have to ask, yet came up with nothing. He looked over to Izashi, who had taken up the armchair in the corner of the room, but also shook his head. No, I think I got everything. Great. Doctor stepped aside and looked at them quietly. Was he supposed to leave now? A vigilante eager to get back to his job might, so was he expected to do the same? He stood up, and the doctor moved completely away, back to the storage case that held a bunch of instruments Shota didn't know the names of, put away his scanner carefully. He didn't pay them any mind. Yeah, seemed likely they were excused. Shota walked to the door, Hizashi following him. Just before he could reach for the handle, the doctor called out a, "Bye, you two. I await your message, blank." Shota nodded and pushed open the door while Hizashi waved right behind him. They stepped out the clinic into the cold, early February night. The door clicked shut behind them, and a moment later the green light flickered to life above them. Hizashi exhaled loudly, likely letting go of breath he was holding, and grabbed his hand. Together they made their way to the alley, back to the car a street over. Only when they were already in the car, driving back to the apartment, did they speak again. Surprisingly, it was Shota who started this conversation. Well, that was pleasant, he said in his deadpan tone. Hizashi wasn't deterred by it from chatting at all. Really? I thought the whole thing was just unnerving. The way he didn't talk at all, that just made me so nervous. He seemed so friendly when I first came here and seemed so eager to speak to me. Shota nodded along, not because he had been unnerving, as his husband described it, but because he realized it was harder than he thought to get information out of this guy. He seemed so chatty and open when he first interviewed Shota the first time, but now that was just gone. Shota set his shoulders. His better bet at finding things about would be the other vigilantes. He now just had to wait for his first assignment. Sector sweep? Reyes asked. Blake nodded once as moved out over the rooftops. Shota had received his schedule for the end of this week, yesterday, showing he was up in his actual district every 2 days, which was Thursday and Saturday, not too different from his hero schedule. Today he was paired together with Reyes, a vigilante he had never seen before, but according to her introduction had been active for nearly 2 years, a year now with the Greenlight network. Patrolling with Reyes was efficient. She covered distance fast, moving through alleys and across rooftops like she'd grown up there. Shota stayed a half step behind her, letting her take a lead when visibility was low. Taking down criminals was just as quick. Sure, he took the lead when it came, because each time she nudged him forward instead of going herself. But if there was more than one, she dropped in behind him and swiftly took them down, surprising the opponent with her speed. Whenever Shota turned around, she was already finished and the criminal was on the ground. "What's your quirk called?" Race asked loudly when they crossed another rooftop, the wind howling in their ears. He debated it quickly, surprised that the coordinator had not given out that information. Mobility type, he answered. That's not a name. It's enough. Shota felt her eyes on him, even while they skidded down the angled rooftop and crossed over to District 13. Fair, she yelled, the wind picking up. Shota didn't say anything further. Reyes clicked her tongue and out of the corner of her eyes when he saw her mouth hanging open again. He rolled his eyes. Focus on the street. Below them, he turned to notice a group of 3 men lingering outside a closed electronics shop. One kept looking up and down the block. 2 stepped through the bent-open entrance with the pry tool. Reyes grinned when she followed his gaze and said something, but her voice was drowned out by the wind. He raised a hand. She stopped instantly. That was another thing about her. For someone who gladly took over and did the leading, she listened when it mattered. He wished some of the heroes he sometimes had to work with would do that. She crouched down beside him on the rooftop. 2 more inside, Shota murmured as the wind carried up voice from the open alley door. Back entrance. Reyes' expression sharpened. I take roof access, you cut the alley? He nodded. They split. The first man was alone in the back room and never stood a chance. Even without a cork, Shota knew what to do. His already silent steps were swallowed by the sounds of the night. The dark of the back room shadowed his shift of weight. He was out behind the door and behind the man before he could even turn. The pry bar hit the tiles loudly as Shota's elbow drove into their ribs. Then a quick throw over his hip. He fastened zip ties over the man's hands with efficiency before the man could even cry out. The next room over, glass shattered, meaning Reyes probably had gotten noticed. 2 men rushed in the room, an outcry of their accomplice. One swung a pipe. Blank slipped past the arc, grabbed the wrist, redirected momentum, impact into a box. Disarmed, down. The second bolted as quickly as she had come on. He didn't make it far. Reyes dropped through the frame of the ceiling beam like a striking hawk, talons extended. She didn't slash, just hooked fabric and yanked him off his feet hard enough to knock the air out of him. He hit his head on the tile and stilled. Clear, she said, breathing steady, crouching over the man to examine the criminal's head. No blood, and he was obviously still breathing. She checked his pulse and stood up again. Behind her, he briefly caught sight of 2 more men down on the ground, zip-tied together, gagged with the masks that they were wearing, struggling against their minds. Shota gave a short nod once the other vigilante was at his eye level again. Reyes led the way towards the back door while Shota pulled out his phone to dial the police. He was surprised when Reyes' hand pushed down his phone and gestured toward her own bright green communication device. On the screen was a bright blue dialing icon, which shifted to make space for a microphone. She brought her watch to her mouth and spoke in their location. The fact that there was a break at the store and that 4 criminals were apprehended. Shota tensed as she hung up. You good, Blank? They got 4 of them, when it originally had been 5. He signaled for Reyes to turn, and she did so without any question. He followed her, so they were standing back to back. After a moment, Reyes moved first. She whipped around, prepared to defend, and only saw a knife cutting through air, cheap, short-bladed, the kind of strike that carried more courage than skill. She moved to intercept, alas, too aggressively. The man flinched, eyes wide, and thrust forward blindly. The blade went in. Middle thigh, medial side. Reyes' breath hitched. Shota closed the distance in 1 step. His hand caught the attacker's wrist before the second strike. For half a second, his eyes flashed red. Erasure instinctively triggered. But then he remembered. Blank doesn't do that. He released the quirk immediately and finished the fight the old way. Wrist torque, disarm, knee to solar plexus. The man collapsed, gasping. Silence, save for the occasional curse of the only criminal able to speak, returned, broken only by Ray's sharp breathing. He quickly zip-tied the criminal's hands together and turned his attention towards Ray's. She was still standing. Shota pulled one of her arms over his shoulder and helped her limp outside. "Sit," Shota said, leaning behind a dumpster. "I'm fine," she snapped, hands flying to put pressure on the wound. Blood was already soaking through her pant leg. Shota's tone didn't change. "Sit." She sat. He crouched, movements quick and precise, his hands checking depth and angle as she hissed in pain. "Missed the artery," he said. "You're lucky." Ray's forced a grin that didn't quite hold. "I prefer skilled." "Hold pressure." She pressed her palm down, her talons retracted automatically, trembling once before stabilizing. Sirens entered the edge of his hearing and grew closer with every moment. He pulled a roll of bandages out of his tool belt and wrapped the room tightly. Ray's watched him work, her lips pressed together. "You had first aid training?" she mumbled behind clenched teeth. Shota tied the bandage firmly, tugging the rest of the roll away into his tool belt. "Don't get stabbed," he replied, completely ignoring her original question. She huffed a weak laugh. Her laugh was overshadowed by the sound of sirens closing in. He stood, scanning the alley, calculating their exit route and probability of running into licensed heroes. Only 2 heroes were covering his patrol route as far as he knew, and they could be anywhere in his 3 districts, so the chance was low. "Allow me to carry you up the roof." Ray's pushed herself up, favoring the leg. "Course." Sirens rounded the corner, but the 2 vigilantes, even the one just posing as one, had already disappeared to a closed-off roof a block over. They held their breath and ducked behind an air vent when they heard movement. A hero rushed past, barely 10 feet away from them, towards where they had just disappeared from. He couldn't stop Ray's in time from looking out from behind the vent and risk being seen. When she turned back towards him, there was a frown on her face. By the time they arrived at the Greenlight clinic, with the help of directions from Ray's, Shota's arm began feeling sore. It was not fun to basically run over rooftops for 30 minutes carrying someone over your shoulder. He shakes it out the moment he sets Ray's down, and she immediately heads for the door to knock on it. It swings open mere moments later, and the doctor greets them, ushering them inside. Shota sits down in the plastic-covered armchair and relaxes for a moment in the soft cushioning, pointedly ignoring the awkward creaking of plastic foil. And then he zones in again once he hears one of the others talking and begins to survey the scene before him, and seemingly right in time. Eraserhead didn't show up to the robbery. All of the blood in his veins froze at those words. Ray's was talking about him, paying no attention to blank in the corner. That other Twilight hero, Messenger, showed up, the same hero from last week. Shota tensed further in his seat, something freezing cold dripping down his back. They knew his hero name. They knew the alias and appearance of his patrol replacement, which was less surprising, but still unnerving. Just how much did they know? The doctor hummed, peeling jagged parts of Ray's pants out of the wound with tweezers. It seems possible that the hero's X-ray and Messenger had taken over Racer's patrol route. If it was possible to go any colder than freezing, then Shota just did. He remained seemingly relaxed in his seat, even while he now heard his own heartbeat too loudly in his ears. They knew his patrol route. They knew exactly who had replaced him. It remained quiet for a minute as the doctor finished picking out the fabric and disinfected the injury. Then he spoke again. That officially marks 3 weeks since he was last seen by one of ours. They were keeping tabs on him. They watched him during his work, and he didn't even realize. He watches as the doctor rolls up Ray's sleeve and disinfects the crook of her elbow. A green vial is placed inside a small syringe, and the clear liquid is injected into the Vigilante's arm. Her injury stops bleeding. He returned home at 2 a.m. from the cut-short first Vigilante patrol. He toed off his shoes in the entryway in a daze and sat down on the stool in the corner. They knew him. They knew what he looked like, knew his patrol route, who replaced him. They had watched him. He buried his face in his hands and exhaled carefully, feeling his own breath ghosting over his cheeks. A picture of his green watch and a copy of the schedule was already glued in the notebook. He began writing. Rays, Vigilante. Quirk, talons. Extendable black nails that shape into bird-like talons. Appearance. Dark purple, blue suit and black mask covering eyes and nose. Dark blonde hair and braid. Light skin. Has been active for 2 years, 1 year in the Greenlight network. Usually patrols districts 10, 11, 12, and 15. Was paired up with blank for the first patrol in 12, 13, 15. Relies more on speed than skill. Doctor seems to keep tabs on heroes in patrol areas and knows names/appearances of underground/twilight heroes. X-Ray, Messenger, Eraserhead. I've been recording for so long, so very long. The first 2 times, or 1.5, I guess, maybe like, yeah. I caught myself, but anyway, I wasn't actually recording. So this chapter, I usually do have chapters stockpiled. Currently, as of recording, I do not have any stockpiled, so I usually post once every 4 days. It's been 5, and I'm only recording now since it took so freaking long, and it's a mad banquet of darkness. But I should get this out. Now it would be today. I started recording this yesterday and a couple days back, but I digress. Why do I even do this? Anyways, after all is said and done, thank you for listening.